Hi everybody, welcome to today's webinar from MBS, so specifying sustainable outcomes. Webinar today will last 55 to 60 minutes. Everyone's microphones are muted, but please, throughout the webinar, feel free to ask questions, make observations using the question box as part of the webinar functionality. We've got a good set of speakers today, good range, starting off with Golnaz, Ighany and Julia Yeo from BDP, and then we'll hear from James Fiske from BCIS, and also chair of the Built Environment Carbon Database Project. And then finally we hear from my colleague Lee Jones, who's head of sustainability at the Byggfakta Group. That's the wider group that's above MBS that has operations worldwide. So BDP first, then James from BCIS, and then finally Lee from NBS stroke Byggfakta. So we'll go straight in with Golnaz and Julia from BDP, an approach to sustainable design.
Thank you, Stephen, for inviting us and to talk about BDP and what we are doing at BDP and our approach on the sustainable design. Just introducing to us our practice. BDP is a major international multidisciplinary practice of architects, designers, engineers, and urbanists. We are a multidisciplinary and big practice. Next slide, please. We have offices within UK and around the world. We have 19 offices totally. We are present in 12 countries and 6 regions. Next slide, please. So, as I said, we are a multidisciplinary practice and we cover various sectors. We work in different sectors such as education, healthcare, retail, transport, urbanism, workplace, and housing. And our approach within working within BDP is very much connecting all various expertise together. Next slide, please. We have various support team within BDP. So within design, we have support from our lighting team. We have a full sustainability team that sits in our London office in Manchester. We have interior design team, urban planning, building services, engineering, civil engineering, and urban design. I have a fairly new role at BDP. My role is connecting the work that has been doing our sustainability team for a long time within the design process and within architecture. So the idea is to implement a sustainable and regenerative approach within design at the early stage, and to be able to upskill our architects and make them understand how we can get to net zero, having that early stage of early approach in design at the early stage. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on now in terms of increase of demand of sustainability reporting. So I'm sure many of you already know, basically 40% of total carbon emission in the UK is linked to the built environment. And we have few interesting new policies and regulatory compliance, new reporting and benchmarking that are pushing the agenda of sustainability. And we have very aware clients, and they are pushing the agenda, and there's a high demand from some of our excellent clients to lead the agenda of net zero. These are, in this slide, you can see few very interesting reporting and frameworks that's been developed in collaboration to some of these UK's leading groups. But one of the very most the interesting one, I would say, is that we are all waiting is this UK net zero carbon building standard. So those leading industry organizations such as BRE, Carbon Trust, CIPSI, RIBA, and LETI, they're putting together the effort in a joint forces to champion this initiative. So as I said previously, there's a significant progress has been made in defining net zero in the building in the UK, but then the process of the market and analyzing market, we can see a clear demand in a one single and that one agreed methodology for the UK to be achieved net zero and the climate targets that the nation has been set. And one of these areas that one of these standards that I wanted to talk about very briefly is NHS Net Zero Building Standards that was released just a few months ago, which is quite interesting. It's one of the first industry leading big organization that they have their own standards. And there's been few alignment in terms of helping us to align both targets for operational and embodied carbon. And we are very much looking forward to see the result of the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standards. And we've been also contributing, we have been contributed to the data sharing of, to implementing this UK Net Zero Standard Building Standards. Next slide, please. Within BDP, we have a very clear we have set a very clear target to be able to push the agenda net zero and sustainable design. This is a quote from our chief executive, Nick Farringham, saying, "The achieve sustainable and measurable goals, our vision must be clear, our values embraced and delivered through small step towards big change." I put this diagram which shows that where we start, and most of our colleagues and industry leaders are starting, is that there is a time to plan. We need to have enough time to plan the agenda of net zero and how we want to get there. We need to have a very clear strategy and have a clear objective and a vision where we want to get, and have a plan action to be able to see that big change and transformation. What we notice is that the data, the transparency of data is very important, to have that access to that data and be creative within the design process. So at the beginning, there is less, we spend less time in, more time in planning, but more we apply the strategy, more we have we move forward, we will be able to see better that transformation, and that will happen with time. Although I know you might say that we don't have enough time because there's a target has been set to achieve the net zero. For instance, London needs to achieve net zero within 2030, but it's very important that we understand the requirements and step by step we apply those requirements. Next slide, please. Something we've been implementing at BDP, and we are very proud, is our innovative hub. In the last few years, we've been starting having this space, we call it BDP Lab. It's very much focused on innovation, and we launched challenges internally, inward-facing challenges throughout the whole classes globally, and we asked people to let us know what they think, what is missing, and what they would like to see within BDP. The last challenge we shared was titled Scaling Up Sustainability. And the idea was asking everyone at every level how we can upskill people to scale up BDP's delivery on sustainable solution. We had many interesting ideas that they were shared with us. We have 3 winners, and one of the winners is very much focused on creating a life cycle assessment tool and material database to be able to implement at the earliest stage of design those requirements of sustainable materials, healthy materials, how we can have access to certain data at the earliest stage to be and have a space to be able to gather the information and apply to our design. This is something we are working on it. We are very excited to implement that, and I just pass over to Julia, who is our senior sustainability consultant within BDP, to explain to us what we've been doing, what are our challenges, and what are those innovative approach we have been implementing in some of our latest projects. Pass it to you, Julia.
Thanks, Golnaz. Yep, so as Golnaz says, I'm just going to run through some of our current processes, the challenges that we have, and what we hope to achieve moving forwards in the future. So one of the big challenges we have as a sustainability team is juggling a whole series of sustainability metrics, and this is particularly apparent when we're looking at material specification. And I guess one of the hardest challenges with material specifications is it tends to happen towards maybe end of stage 3, stage 4, when possibly the designers have already made some choices towards what materials they've already chosen, and therefore our job would therefore be to review materials one by one with these various metrics. And especially as the industry has developed, these metrics keep growing. So as everyone is familiar with certification schemes such as BREEAM, WELL, LEED all have their specific requirements for materials, whether that be responsible sourcing, embodied carbon, circular economy, or even healthy materials. That list just keeps growing. I guess the one good thing about working within BDP, being a multidisciplinary organization, is that we're able to work quite closely with our architects during that period of choosing materials. So that's what we're trying to push forward, moving forward, especially with our projects which have very high sustainability aspirations, going for net zero, very high embodied carbon or healthy material aspirations, making sure that we're collaborating as much as we can, making sure the architects are aware of what they need when specifying materials at the early stage, and we're working together, and it's not a process where someone chooses something and then we verify it afterwards. So something that BDP have developed is what we call Process Plus, and this encompasses our general design process with BDP and how all of our disciplines work together. And within Process Plus, we do have a healthy material specification note, guidance note, and within that guidance note, we have listed quite a number of different requirements, in particular for healthy materials, just because we do work on a lot of healthcare projects, and as Golnaz mentioned before, new certifications such as the net zero, NHS net zero carbon standard will require us moving forward to be much more careful about the materials that we are selecting, making sure that we are covering the human aspect part of it, but also the kind of embodied carbon part of it, which will is the information in EPDs. So how we see this kind of process growing and how we see our kind of collaboration with MBS is that trying to define what a good materials database looks like. What MBS can provide us is a very comprehensive materials database for either generic materials or manufacturer specific materials. So for the generic materials, we think that that would help us a lot in the design process in a much earlier stage to say, actually, these are the materials that you should be looking at. These are the various certificates that are associated with each one, and that massively would streamline our process. We know what to choose, what not to choose, what to look at, and moving forward as we get into the much more detailed stage, what products we could look into in more detail, and also working together with MBS if there are particular products that may not have that information. Actually, we can request them and build up our internal library. So that's a process that we're starting and we're developing, and we can see the massive need for it just based on a lot of the projects that we have, which have very high sustainability standards. And as Golnaz mentioned, with the BDP lab research project and research funding, that's something that will feed into that, and it's giving us the time to push the boundaries of what we can do and to make sure that our workflow is as good as it can be moving forward, and to achieve all these extra targets that are required now for our projects. Yeah, so that's it from me, and thank you.
Thank you, Julia. I also wanted to add something very clearly. You explained the need and what we have been doing and we are doing within BDP is having those data, and it's data transparency, and being able to specify material early is very important for us. So what has been we see as the biggest challenge so far is, first of all, is upskilling architects, because historically architects, they have their own process of doing the specification, or at the early stage choosing certain materials within their softwares and the way they do it. Not always priority was looking at EPD, which is environmental product declaration, or healthy material, or any other requirement that now is required for instance, some of our certification, BREEAM LEED, or how we can respond to our ISO 14001 requirements. What we would like to see is a workflow that allow us at early this access to data for design, not too specific, but something that they can at the early stage understand the requirement and make right choices, and then connect it to NBS, which comes at the later stage of the design, but then find a way that make this process a bit smoother than what it is, and connect the dots. So we don't want to have that stage that architects pass something to a consultant, to an expert, and saying, can you review this? We want to be able in a moment that everyone understands those requirements and have their say in the process, and to be able to also prioritize that somehow. So that connection for us is very important. And the second point is the data transparency. More data we have, more information we gather, better it is. We know that is sometimes challenging. Not all the manufacturing are sharing data with us, but I think there is the whole process of cultural change. I think we need to go back and ask them, say, you know, these data are needed, are important. I think independently if the certification is needed or not, it should be something that it should be embedded in the way we look at materials. It's not about only the tactile side part of it, or the beauty of it, or how the light passes through, or how the light reflects. It's about also how that material was made, where it was made, and the process of connected to the carbon emission. Yes, that's from us, and we are very positive to be able to see this progress quite soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Golnaz. And now we'll pass over to James, the importance of data and the drive for sustainability. Over to you, James.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me today to talk to you a little bit about sort of data in sustainability. My name is James Fiske. I've got two hats on. The first is I'm the CEO of BCIS, the Building Cost Information Service, and the second is I'm chair of something called BECD, which is the Built Environment Carbon Database, that I'll be talking to you all a little bit later on during today's session. For those who aren't aware of BCIS, BCIS is the leading provider of cost and price information to the construction industry. The easiest way to sort of explain BCIS is through a diagram, which I'll sort of talk you through now. At various stages of a construction project, we get varying levels of information that we use to provide sort of specification decisions on, and those things affect the cost of construction projects and the environmental emissions associated with those construction projects. BCIS is designed to provide information at those various stages. So hopefully at the bottom of the screen, you can see various stages of a construction project, from appraisal through to design, through to construct, operate, and end of life. And during each stage, we increasingly understand more about the construction project that we're working on. So at the appraisal stage, chances are you don't know much. You might know that it's a particular building type and maybe a bit of a size and maybe a few bits of specification, but you don't know a great deal. At the early stage, quantity surveyors such as myself will use a very early sort of information like cost per meter squared or cost per functional units in order to determine the cost of construction projects. As we get into concept design, all the way through to detailed design, the amount of information that we get on our construction projects increases. So again, quantity surveyors like myself will use more and more detailed information in order to understand the costs of construction projects. So at conceptual design stage, we'd use typically elemental rates and systems rates. And as we get more and more into detailed design, we'll move to components, approximate costs, all the way through to very detailed activity rates, which is where we actually start to specify sort of, particular materials that we're going to use in our construction project, construction techniques that we're going to adopt to use to build our building or construction project. It's only after we've built the project that actually we have a proper understanding of the makeup of it, what was included in it, how we built it, any variations associated with it. And of course, if we're trying to predict the ongoing maintenance and replacements associated with running that building for the next 60, 80, 100 years, it's only after that operational phase that we truly understand how much maintenance and replacement work was actually conducted. So what I'm trying to sort of explain here is the evolving nature of the information that we know on our construction projects, and that unfortunately translates to a level of confidence at each stage as well. This is an accuracy funnel, which is often used to depict the increasing levels of accuracy associated with the project. So the accuracy funnel shows at the beginning, at the appraisal stage, when we're not certain about what we're going to build, the tolerance of our cost estimates will range quite considerably. So we can see the plus and minus being quite a distance away. In some cases, that can vary, well over sort of plus or minus 50% in terms of accuracy levels right at the beginning of the project. Some construction projects would be quite happy with that level of tolerance. And we can see that, during as we get more and more information on our construction projects, the more accurate that those cost predictions become. So BCIS is really designed to provide information at those various stages, trying to improve that estimate and accuracy sort of funnel. So why am I here to talk to you today? Well, climate change is undoubtedly the greatest challenges of all time, and I'm not going to go into scientific debates about what it is and whether it's real or whether it's not. The only thing I'm going to dwell on is the statement at the bottom that 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from the built environment. The worrying thing is, according to latest sort of projections, they're predicted to double by 2050 if we don't do anything about it, and that's incredibly scary. So as a construction professional, no matter what discipline you fulfill, it's our duty to do something about this. We need to reduce the emissions, we need to reduce the impacts that we are making in the built environment. We can't reverse the decisions that we make, so specification decisions that we're making now, for example, on construction projects, we have to live with. We can't reverse those things. So we need to make very sure that we're making the right specification decisions as early as possible. So the challenge is we need to drive down those emissions. In order to do that, we need, in my opinion, we need three things. We need a consistent methodology, a methodology that tells us what to measure, what to include, what not to include, and how to report those emissions, so that everybody in the design team can feel informed and consistently can make those right specification sort of decisions. So we need a consistent methodology. We obviously need access to consistent data, not just for calculations, but also to allow us to compare our projects against other projects that have happened in the construction industry. We need to learn from those historical projects so that we hopefully learn in a good way in terms of sort of driving the emissions down on our construction projects. And obviously we need competent assessors, so people who can do that. And I think that's our role across the industry, that no matter what profession we have, we all need to have an understanding of what these carbon emission numbers are, how they're calculated, and how we can reduce them. We need to avoid the typical garbage in, garbage out scenario. There are probably close to 100 carbon calculators out there in the construction industry at the moment, and they all have great intentions, don't get me wrong, but they're all working in slightly different ways. They're all producing slightly different numbers. So if you ask a carbon accountant or an assessor to produce emissions data on the same building, if you use, say, 5 different carbon assessors to report on the same building, chances are that you're going to get 5 different numbers out. And that's not to say that that one of those assessors is better than the others. It's the fact that they're all using either different methodologies or different data in order to come up with those numbers. So that gives us a problem in the industry, because we can't truly compare one project against another and make sure that we're making the right sort of specification decisions and choices on our construction project. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about the methodology, because actually we do have a methodology that's out there. It's published in 2017 by the RICS. It's a whole life carbon assessment for the built environment. This is in the process of being updated. The latest information I've been given is that the update to the professional standard will be available around September time, which is great. But this version that you see on screen, the 2017 version, is the latest one that we should all be using. One of the great things about the methodology is that it takes a whole life approach. So you're measuring not just the emissions associated with the materials that go into your construction project, but also you're considering any operational carbon during its use. How often it's replaced and maintained is all considered as part of this methodology. And also it takes it all the way through to the end of the life in terms of its deconstruction, its decommissioning, or hopefully its recycling and reuse within future projects. So this gets us to think as a design team in terms of, making a specification choice based on the whole life performance of the material or the component that we're specifying. So the methodology is there, which is great. That's freely available on the RICS website if anyone would like to read more about it. In terms of the data, we do have a slightly bigger challenge, because unlike the cost data that I was talking about that BCIS provides to the construction industry, we don't have a rich history of carbon data. Numbers of consultants are rapidly increasing in this area. The carbon studies that we're undertaking on projects has been growing, but we still don't have that rich history of carbon data. And part of the challenge is that we can't access that data. It's not in a central place. So if people are looking for carbon data, they spend a lot of time researching, trying to find different sources of information. So the good news is, and one of the main reasons that I'm here to talk to you today, is that about 3 years ago, a group of professional bodies and organizations got together and said, look, we need to do something about this. We need to improve the availability and consistency of the data for carbon assessments. So the concept of the Built Environment Carbon Database, BECD, was formed. This is being powered and funded by BCIS. Unfortunately, it's not a central government funding pot here, so we had to get together and we had to find a way of making this to work. And BCIS have been funding the technology that sits behind the Built Environment Carbon Database. And lots of people across the industry have been getting involved in working groups and consultations in order to get the Built Environment Carbon Database to a stage where we're close to launching it. The Built Environment Carbon Database isn't a calculator, it's not a tool, it's not a piece of software, it is an online data repository. And I'll talk to you a little bit in the next sort of couple of slides in terms of what information that it's looking to capture. But it's free to access, so it doesn't sit behind a paywall, and it's available to anyone who registers under BECD. Now, the name's a little bit confusing, the Built Environment Carbon Database, because there's actually two databases. So one is for entity data, so project data, and one is for product emissions data. And I'll come on and explain what those two things mean in a little bit more information shortly. The data that's being captured within the Built Environment Carbon Database will link to cost data within BCIS, so that you'll start to be able to compare not just the environmental performance and the emissions associated with your specification choices, but also the costs that come from BCIS. So the idea is that you'll be able to consider both of those things at the same time. And the great news is that the Built Environment Carbon Database, as I said at the beginning, has been around sort of, the concept was born about 3 years ago. We're now really close to launching this. So this will be launched in October of this year. I'm delighted to say that MBS have recently given their full support, and they're now working with the BECD team as well. And I'm sure that's something that we can talk about perhaps as part of the Q&A with Stephen shortly. So in terms of the two sections of the Built Environment Carbon Database, the asset section or the entity section is a project repository. So this will be capturing embodied and operational carbon data for construction projects, not just at one point in time, but at different stages of the project, which is going to be really important as obviously, as we talked about at the beginning, that projects evolve and they change in terms of the levels of understanding. It's important to capture the data at that evolving stage of a construction project. And that's what the BECD asset section will do. It has a manual, but also a semi-automated data input. We're also investigating and sort of in discussions with commercial software and carbon calculators to make sure that we can make it as seamless as possible from those calculators over into the Built Environment Carbon Database sort of systems in the near future. And as with any database, you would expect, you can search for projects, you can look up projects, you can download projects, and you can compare those projects. And this will become more intelligent over time. The more and more data comes in, so you'll be able to search for show me different cladding sort of options for a particular building type, for example, and then you'll be able to run a report that sort of shows you the typical sort of emissions of those different sort of cladding options. So it's evolving, and it will evolve as more and more data sort of pumps into the Built Environment Carbon Database. So that's the asset section. The product section hopefully speaks for itself. It's a catalogue of carbon data for construction products. So these will be LCAs, so life cycle assessments that have been conducted. It will range from full EPDs, so environmental product declarations, all the way through to sort of estimates or professional or academic life cycle assessments. So the idea is that rather than having lots of pieces of data sort of spread around the internet and other sources, the Built Environment Carbon Database product section will pull all of that together so that users will be able to search for a particular product or a material type and get some information about it, and perhaps just as importantly, get a link over to where that data came from. So from a manufacturer's website, for example, or a full EPD that's been been completed. It will also have signposts to paid databases as well. Obviously, we won't be able to reproduce the data in those paid databases, but at least you'll be aware as a user that that data does exist. So they're the two sections of the built environment carbon database. And if we go back to sort of where we started today's brief session on the various stages of a construction project, the data that comes out of the built environment carbon database will serve a number of these different stages of data that we need. So early stage, we will be able to get out of the BECD carbon per meter squared for different sort of building types, all the way through to different sort of elemental ranges and rates for different building types, and then finally all the way down to the detailed sort of different materials. So the idea is that the BECD over time, as the data sort of grows and improves, will be able to form the basis of that data that you need at various stages. This is an example of BECD linking in with BCIS with some materials data. So the materials data that BCIS sort of provides from a cost perspective and discounts and inflation forecasts. This example sort of shows that the BECD sort of data will be linking in with that, so that people can start to consider cost and emissions at the same time. We're working very closely with NBS in order to try and get this data into NBS as well. So look out for an announcement on that shortly. The idea is that the data that we have, if we can get that over into a format that will help designers and specifiers, then we can more easily, I hope, influence our levels of emissions on construction projects in the future. So it was only a brief session today. Really, it was about sort of explaining that if it's not blatantly clear, we're in the biggest fight of our lives with climate change, and it's not up to us to point fingers at other people to do something about it. We all need to get involved and try and drive down those incredibly high emissions that the built environment is responsible for. The availability of data is absolutely essential, and the great news is that with the built environment carbon database and the links over to BCIS and hopefully NBS, we will be able to start to get consistent data into some of the workflows and processes that we already undertake, and drive down emissions is obviously the ultimate goal. There's more guidance and webinars available on BCIS. If you haven't had enough of my voice already, there's quite a few long webinars that you can join where I talk about some of these things in a bit more detail. And if you want to get involved in BECD, and I really hope you do, because this is an industry database, please register your interest on BECD or make contact with me. And the final thing is our little friend there over on the right. We do need you. This is an industry problem, and we all need to get behind and do something about it. We have to share and we have to learn from construction projects and from each other. The BECD is really being designed to help that sort of sharing and data and learning, ultimately to drive down emissions. So thank you for your time today. Appreciate it. And I'll hand back to you, Stephen. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks very much, James. Just a few questions. Like quantity surveyors have obviously been asked by clients, is that the primary job to sort of do estimates and how much projects are going to cost in pounds and pence? Are we seeing that just increasing all the time now in terms of what the cost is to the environment as well?
Absolutely, yeah, we are seeing more examples of this now happening in the industry, Steve, which is great. I mean, there's the slight challenge in the industry that there isn't a specific role or profession that's been allocated to do this and regulated to do it properly. So I'm certainly aware of examples where, you know, architects, engineers, all the way through to quantity surveyors are being asked to sort of report on carbon numbers. A number of the large sort of QS practices are developing sort of carbon calculators themselves that link over to costs. So as they're measuring to do quantity surveying related, you know, historical cost tasks, they're also able to start to report carbon numbers, which is great, with the slight caveats that as long as everybody's using the same methodology and the same data in the way that I talked about a little while ago. Now, I think it's our duty as construction professionals to, even if clients aren't asking for it, that we should be advising on emissions of the choices of their construction projects. And I'm seeing examples of that in the industry now as well, that actually you're employing me as a quantity surveyor, but by the way, here's also a report on the whole life carbon emissions, which I think is fantastic. And that's the way that we should be doing things as construction professionals.
And like over the last 10, 15 years, we've seen sort of clients that have that sort of social conscience asking for these sort of things. But is it more than that now? Is this sort of legislation coming down that certainly you haven't got a choice anymore? Will that situation happen?
I think we're getting there, Stephen, but yeah, we don't quite have the full sort of stick from the government, but we are seeing examples of planning departments now asking for carbon assessments as part of, you know, planning conditions and submissions, which is fantastic. So the likes of GLA are mandating those sorts of assessments, which is brilliant. The industry has been trying to push something called Part Z, which is sort of a supplement to the building regulations on this, but there's been a slight reticence to sort of accept the industry's sort of suggestions by the government, probably because of the wider sort of economic turmoil and not wanting to place additional financial burdens on the supply chain at the moment. But the government is working and investigating how to sort of put this into sort of legislation going forwards. On top of that, of course, and if you're a larger organization, you are expected to report your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So again, depending on where you are in the supply chain, you might actually need to be reporting some of these carbon numbers as part of your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions as well, Stephen. So yeah, we're getting there. It's not quite as tight as I think we should be yet, but all the signs are there that as soon as things like the data is there, the methodology and the calculators and the assessors are there can be no resistance from anyone to start to measure these things consistently and then apply regulation and sort of, you know, government mandates to it. So I think we're close.
And I thought, was it 2017? You said the RICS sort of guidelines and documents. Does that bring all of the standards together in EPDs and just set it out in terms of this is how you do whole life cycle analysis?
Exactly that. But if you think of it's a life cycle analysis for a building as opposed to a product. But the RICS professional standard professional statement is really taking those core bits of standards that you're referring to there and applying a bit more information, because some of the generic sort of standards on you know, the various British standards, EN, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, I'm sure you'll know it, leaves a little bit of interpretation. So the RICS professional standard takes that as the base and then explains exactly how to do it, what to do, what not to do, what to include and what to exclude. So it's building upon those standards and applying a bit more detail to them, Stephen, is probably the best way to explain it.
One final question. Over the years, we've worked together on a number of projects, classification, BIM tool, going back to 2014. We've recently had some workshops with joint customers. And what do you think architects want from the sort of cost consultancy side, and what do you think cost consultants want from the architecture side so they can come together and produce more sustainable outcomes?
Fantastic question. Probably not a quick one to answer, Stephen, but I think getting all construction professionals to start to sing off the same hymn sheet is really, really important. So if you're a designer, having early stage sort of cost and carbon information that you can discuss with your quantity surveyor, I think is going to be really, really important. What we don't want is those design teams to be quoting and doing different things. We don't want the design teams to start quoting numbers that don't relate to the measurement and the process that the quantity surveying firms, for example, would be measuring. So getting them to work closer together is really important. But getting them to do that underpinned by consistent data and a consistent methodology, I think, is incredibly important. And that's the bit that obviously we're really keen to work with MBS to do. So fingers crossed, we'll have some great news to announce to the industry very soon on that.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Thank you for today, James. And we really look forward to October and the launch of the BECDs, plural. But thank you for today.
Thank you, Stephen. All the very best. Thank you.
So the final speaker today is Lee Jones, Head of Sustainability at Byggfakta Group. Over to you, Lee.
Thanks very much, Stephen, and hello, everybody. My name's Lee Jones, as Stephen's just alluded to. I am the Head of Sustainability for Byggfakta Group. For anybody that's not familiar who Byggfakta Group are, if you missed the beginning of the presentation, Byggfakta Group are actually MBS's parent company. They are an international technology firm based in Sweden, and in the UK we own MBS and Ighany. But all around the world, we've got different products and services and tools similar to those that we have in the UK. The great thing about this actually is that what we're developing in the UK in terms of MBS and what's going on with Ighany, we're actually managing to replicate on an international level, but likewise taking the benefits through the platforms that we have internationally and actually bringing that technology into MBS. So it's a great all-round thing for us, but the main benefit is obviously for you as the users of our tools and software. You're going to be seeing some continual improvement moving forward, and obviously with sustainability becoming more and more of a pressured subject for people to manage, it's only going to be a benefit, I think, for that. So what you can see on the screen here is MBS Chorus. If you're a user of MBS Chorus, great. If not, by all means, drop us a note at the end of the webinar and someone would be happy to set up a one-to-one demo, whether you will talk you through the different availability within that to suit your own practice needs. But within Chorus itself, obviously this is a specification tool. It's all cloud-based, and specifiers use this to write their specifications, whether that's for the component makeup of the building or whether it's the contractual documentation for things like works, how the products, materials, systems have to be installed, to what level of workmanship, to meet what standards, etc. But it also covers sustainability. So I'm just going to jump into a demo project that I've got here. You can see on the screen when this pops up, it asks me if I want to sign in as a writer or a designer. We've actually got quite a cost-friendly functionality now where you can actually have designer licenses. So if you've got a lot of users that are linking things like the Revit models or ArchiCAD or whatever it is that you're using to the specification, that might be a great option for you. But for this sake, I'm just going to enter as a writer, which gives me the full admin rights to Chorus itself. Now, when setting up some of the contractual requirements in the specification, it might be things like the JCT, etc. you're doing. There's a lot that you can do in terms of sustainable outcomes. So prior to the webinar, to save everybody a little bit of time, I actually went in and just pulled out a few of the key ones that you can see. So if we move into here, if we were looking at project information, for example, there's a lot that goes into Chorus that's already pre-built in that you can go and start to use for your specifications. So this could be things such as site and ground environmental information, and this covers all sorts of things from ecological surveys through to the environmental impact report. If we move into these specific specifications, you can see that the guidance starts to change on the right hand side, and this is the same for every element within the specification. One of the great functionalities within Chorus is that our team of technical authors, who are based in our headquarters up in Newcastle, are actually keeping this up to date and linking things to relevant standards, industry expectations, government guidelines, etc., and making sure that that data's there, so it saves you the hard work. And there's a lot of recommendations and things that you can go through into doing that. If we just move down into something like project information, so you might be specifying the project information here, and you might want to cover the environmental policy. Now, what you can see here, we've already got predefined templates, and this covers a hell of a lot of things. So obviously typical details revolving around the project itself, any specific requirements. Now, this might be something where you want to be aiming for something like BREEAM or LEED within your project. You can set out those sort of outlines there, or maybe it might be a passive house building that you're looking at. But then going into specifics, you can set the environmental targets. So you can go into things like the CO2 arising from the site activities, something that's maybe being considered more and more so now as people are starting to look at life cycle analysis, and particularly the embodied carbon that's going into the buildings. A lot of the users that we're discussing now, and you can read quite a lot about this in MBS's Sustainable Futures report, which I'll touch on later, is making sure that this is set out as one of the project outcomes. It's a given that achieving sustainable outcomes can be complex, but they are way more achievable and a lot more cost effective the earlier on within the project that those are instigated. So by doing this, we can set up the guidelines here, and we're giving everybody and all the stakeholders within the project something to work to. I could go on throughout different things here. We've got stuff like the information exchange requirements. So this could relate to something like fire safety and the golden thread, and making sure that the data is passed through to the relevant individuals in the correct expected way there. But particularly with sustainability information, as a designer, you might be setting out certain information requirements, and that needs to be passed on to the users, such as contractors, subcontractors, the manufacturers of the products that you're going to be specifying their products and systems, but then also having that availability of information for operation and maintenance when the building's in the in-use phase. But moving into the actual written specification, got some examples here of where we might look at products that we could actually set up. So this example might be a parking area specification, and what I've pre-built into this at the moment is electric vehicle charging points. So in a sort of world where we are looking to make provisions for these things, and obviously charging infrastructure's a bit of a hot topic at the moment, we've got all of the relevant specification guidelines within there. And if we move in to the exact specification page itself here, you can see that by clicking on this, we can actually go into the guidance, and it gives us all the relevant standard criteria, etc., that we have to sort of consider when we're specifying these products, or directly linked to MBS source. MBS now has the ability to give you manufacturers' physical products directly within the specification. So in this case, we can go and look at this. This is a pod point charger, quite a popular brand. You see these placed in supermarket car parks, etc. You can go down and check all the relevant information, and once you're happy with that, you can then go to add to spec. And as you can see then, that's dropped the manufacturer's product straight in. If there's any variations on things, you can then go and pick between the options that are available within that. Then once we hit the save button, that's actually then been added to the spec. The next thing that I wanted to discuss was MBS source. So we've just briefly seen MBS source linking into Chorus when we were specifying the EV charging points. What MBS source is our online product search engine. Now, this is an amalgamation of some of our historic products, which were our IBA product selector and the National BIM library. But today, it's all in one place. It's source.thembs.com, or you can just Google MBS source and it'll come up at the top of the search. And you can go in here and you can start to search for pretty much anything you want. Now, what I want to show you at the moment is the different certification schemes, etc., that we have within the platform itself. There's been a large focus on delivering sustainable outcomes and getting the manufacturers to produce their information in a clear and structured, unambiguous way in terms of that. So if I just look for something simple here, I'm just going to type wood, I'm not going to look for a specific product. And the reason for this is I want to show how the filters work on the right hand side. So by putting in something that's a little bit ambiguous, it then brings in more options for me to choose from. So when I scroll down to the left, you can see that we've then got all of these filters. Now, if I look at the third-party certification section, just through products that are made of wood, and obviously there are thousands of other products on the system as well, you can see that we've got things like declaration of performance, environmental product declarations, cradle-to-cradle certificates, quiet mark. It might be that you're looking at designing around acoustics and reducing noise, something that's become quite prevalent, I think, since the pandemic, and people realized how, when they were working in a digital way, how much noise was impacting things like Teams meetings and so forth. FSC for making sure that your timber's ethically sourced, PFC, you name it, it's all in there. We've got BREEAM, LEED, the list goes on. I mean, I can scroll down here. Something that might not seem too obvious, but things like made in Britain, obviously, if you're considering the life cycle analysis of your project, one of the things that you can do is source materials that are close to the project instead of international sort of shipping, etc. And yeah, there's a whole host of different things that you can do in there. There's ISO 14001, ISO 9001 sort of accredited suppliers. There's a lot that you can do. But if we look for a specific product this time, and I'm going to pick something different. Let's look for sloping glazing. So the type of thing that would go in on a roof. It might be that you're designing in some of the passive measures within your particular project, and you're looking at getting as much daylight in, maximum within the center of large enclosed rooms. Obviously, we'll reduce the energy demand on electricity and lighting that way. We can actually then go and start to see some of the options that we've got in there. Now, you can see that we've got one product that's got an EPD within here. If we click on that, takes us to that specific product page. Now, within the variation, this product's available in different U values, so we can pick that there based on its thermal conductivity. We've got the application where it's suitable for description, features and benefits, etc., that the manufacturer has provided. General information that powers some of those filters that we saw on the previous screen. The classification. Any product that we have within the MBS platform is classified primarily to Uniclass, which is the recognized way of classifying things in a digital sort of environment. But we also still classify to cause the common arrangement of work sections, primarily because it's still very much a widely used classification type. Then moving down to the specification data, those templates that you saw within MBS Core as previously when we were looking at the EV charger, for example, all of the data that is listed within MBS source is structured to those same templates, which is what allows the interconnection between the two platforms. So anything that you need to specify, and if there's options, are then listed within there. But then when we get down to the environmental data, a little bit further down here, you can see that we've then started to collate a lot of information around things like embodied carbon. For MBS, we've actually focused on A1 to A3 stage for this at the moment. The main reason for that is that obviously when we're focusing on the embodied carbon within a building, getting that cradle to gate figure from the manufacturer is the most ideal solution. The project itself could be in different locations, which obviously is going to have impact on the transportation amounts to the relevant different sites. But likewise, with EN 15804, A1 to A3, and then consideration to D is the only mandatory requirement within that standard at the moment. So a lot of manufacturers will have certain criteria within the B and C sectors for in use and other relevant sort of information regarding the whole life carbon, but not everybody will. So this is a consistent figure that you can use, and it's something that we've benchmarked. That means that when you want to compare products, for example, you're getting the same base figure and the same relevant units for each product. Recyclability, there's guidance there on the manufacturer on there, and then recycle content. There are other things that we can add in, which I'll show you when we get into the manufacturer partner platform in a moment. I'll show you how this data is authored and some of the information that we're requesting from those manufacturers. But then finally, you can scroll down and you can actually download the EPD. Now you can see that there's two here. Finally, within the MBS platforms itself is the MBS partner platform. So everything that we saw in source on these previous screens here is authored in the background directly within there. So I'm just going to jump into products and show you how that works. So the MBS authors or the manufacturers themselves will be in here and looking for some of the products that they might need to approve, or setting up new products that they want to create. I'm just going to do that. I'm just going to create a single product now and show you how it works. So if I was looking for, I don't know, let's call this Lee's carpet tile. And then we can search for this, which is going to help us classify it. And you can see that we've got the different options there, and it's brought it in with the Uniclass reference. We can add that in, click to next, and then click confirm. Now this is then going to open up the relevant window, and what it's done straight away, it's brought in all the general information, but in the MBS specification section, it's actually tailored the data template for a carpet tile. So if it was a window that I was creating, or a WC pan, for example, or a piece of insulation, it would have its own unique data template. But in the general section, the environmental credentials that we asked for are all pretty much the same. So when we scroll down to this, we can see that what we're asking for with an MBS is, does it contain any red list materials? So this is a great place for the manufacturer to actually list whether it contains any volatile organic compounds, things like urea formaldehyde, for example, within bonding of substrates is a typical one that you would maybe see. Examples of yes, no within their country of material origin. So where was the material sourced? And then the country of product manufacturer. So if you're looking at assessing local materials, or the distance that materials are traveling from the manufacturer to your site, it's a great way of allowing you to do some calculations there. But taking that one step further, we're then asking for the embodied carbon figures here. Now these will be verified by the manufacturer, and typically will come from the environmental product declaration. What we can do is make sure that we select the relevant declared units. Now EN 15804 is the international standard for life cycle assessments, and for monitoring products that measures these in either unit, so one piece of the product, i.e. an entire chair, or it could be in kilograms, so it might be in kilograms per product, meters, meter squared, and meter cubed. So if you were making I don't know, say sheet glass, for example, you might have an EPD that's been measured in kilograms or meters squared. So depending on what the thickness is, you can then scale that up and down depending on the size. And likewise with meters, this might be for things like copper piping, stainless steel piping, etc., in different sections. And meters cubed would be for typical sort of bulk things like aggregates, concrete, anything that's sort of in powdered or liquid form, for example, might come in that, or in kg as well. So just be mindful when you're comparing. Obviously the comparison tool within MBS source allows you to do that, but there are differences within how these EPD figures are being measured. I mentioned earlier about some of the changes that are going to be continually developing within the platform, and one that we've got coming quite soon is the ability to filter by recycled content and embodied carbon within the source platform. This is in testing at the moment, so I expect to see this released relatively soon. But the screenshot there just gives you an idea of what we're going to do. The previous filters, you had to pick the specific numerical value, and obviously we've understood that you might want to just see things that are under a certain percentage, or over a certain percentage if it's in the case of recycled content. So adding a slider in and setting the ability to allow people to do sort of minimum, maximum percentages, I think is going to then allow you to filter those products even better to achieve your sustainable outcomes. If you've got any suggestions or anything that you think would be an improvement within the platforms, again, by all means, drop us a note. But with that, I think it's probably a good time for me to now hand back to Stephen, and I'd like to wish you a pleasant rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lee. So that's all we've got time for today. Please pop any messages, any discussions in the chat. Love to hear your opinion on what's been presented today. Visit thembs.com to learn more about MBS cores, how it can help you and your colleagues specify more sustainable outcomes on projects, and also visit MBS Source to learn more about how MBS Source can help you discover more sustainable products that are out there in the market. If you want to email us, info@thembs.com, and our website is thembs.com. Thank you very much and take care. Bye-bye.